very much, Lori, and welcome everyone. So I don't really have too much in terms of a PowerPoint to share. I want to get right into it and talk about building custom libraries. But I will do just have a quick intro slide for myself. As Larry mentioned, my name is Vince Daniele, Building Solutions Team Manager here at Imagine It, and I am also the Twinmotion Technical Lead. So for those of you who have joined us in these sessions in the past, welcome back. For those that are new, welcome. What we like to do in these sessions is just cover a specific topic and kind of show you, in this case, the configuration, how to build custom libraries, and some of the things that you can do. So really it's a focused feature set of content or workflow that we're presenting here. Some of the advantages that you'll get from building custom libraries in Twinmotion are that you will have access to anything that you store in your custom library to use across multiple projects. There's no additional loading or re-downloading or changing folders or anything in between projects. So you have it all right there built into Twinmotion. One great thing is that if you set this up correctly, all of the users in your office or in your company will have access to the same shared custom libraries if you so choose to do that. And ultimately this will lead to save time because we're not having to go chase down assets from other projects and copy and paste them in like you might do or might have done in the past. So a lot of benefits for creating custom libraries. And with that, I'll just jump right into Twinmotion. All right, so I already have Twinmotion launched up here on my screen, and I just kind of wiped out any of the background sky element or the background image of the buildings and changed the ground to just this nice white plane. So when we're building custom libraries, you can either do this actively in a current project. So if you were to, let's say, load in a Revit model that was full of your Revit families that were converted over into Twinmotion, you can grab individual assets from that project and store them to your custom library. What I'm going to show you here is, first off, is how we can bring in different assets, import them in, check out the materials that are assigned to them, and then what the process is of storing it to your custom library. So with that, in the Twinmotion interface, back up a couple steps here. If you just go to the main page of the library or the tool palette in Twinmotion, at the bottom of the scroll, you have this little icon for user library. When you click this, initially, if this is the first time you've ever looked at your custom library, it is just going to have this plus sign to create new folders. But as we're creating custom assets, they will show up here. So when we go to store them, they automatically get placed in this area, and we can organize them with folders and subfolders. And what's great about this is that it actually does connect to a Windows File Explorer folder structure. So what we're seeing here in Twinmotion is a nice interface to getting to these folders, but you can also move things around sort of in a normal Windows environment. I don't know that I would recommend that, especially if you're sharing it across multiple users within the company. Try to use the Twinmotion interface to manage. There is some quirks to it that I've noticed once you've created custom assets and you start moving them around. They might kind of lock up in the library where you can't delete them or move them around because you've gone out in Windows and moved them. So try to manage it in this user library. But we'll get back to that. I'll show you actually the process of creating the custom content and saving them to your libraries. So there are really two main things that we can store. We can store materials, so just any type of material that you can configure, and you can store 3D assets with materials and with lights assigned to them, which is great. So, so with that, I've set up a little bit of a sample here to start with. I did go off for people that have used Twinmotion in the past. You automatically have access to the Quixel Megascans online repository of 3D assets and materials. So what I did here is I downloaded this little parking meter, and I thought it was kind of a cool one. Everyone can relate to. We know what a parking meter is. This has some nice materials and color on it. So what I did from the Megascans website is I downloaded this asset. When you do download it from Megascans, you have the option of what resolution you want your maps and the quality of the 3D component. So just to kind of show some of the settings, when you download it directly from the Megascans library, you can pick which level of detail you're downloading. We covered this in a previous presentation for LOD, so I'm not going to go too far into this, but it might be a little bit opposite of what you're used to. LOD 0 is the most detailed, and then it scales down. The geometry gets less detailed once you get to these higher numbers. So some of the assets on Megascans might only have 4 levels of detail, again, with 0 being the highest. Other ones have many more. But with that, we can also choose to download different maps for creating our texture and material. In this case, I've just got kind of the simple ones selected here. Actually, probably don't need a lot of these, like brush, fuzz. For Twinmotion, these could be used in other programs like 3ds Max or the Unreal Engine, but as far as Twinmotion is concerned, really the primary focus is the albedo, the normals, and we do support displacement, which I'll point out, even though we're not really digging into materials specifically in this presentation, but I'll show you where to find that. But essentially, that's really it. We don't need any of these other. I do believe that some of the opacity channels can be set up depending on what materials you're working with. So I'll download that too. So I've downloaded that. I extracted the zip folder, kind of preface this and preset it up. So at this point, I'm just going to import the FBX file that I downloaded from the web into this current project. I use the Megascans library to download it because it's free. We have access to it, but you can download 3D FBX files or other like OBJ, different formats from really anywhere, or take them from other modeling authoring programs that you're using and import them into Twinmotion. Just for the sake of this presentation, I thought, hey, it would be easy to download the FBX from Megascans and bring it in. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, so for geometry, I'm just going to browse to where I put this. Okay, so there's my LOD 0 FBX file. As you can see, it is larger than the other ones, which means there's probably more faces in there. I'm gonna open that one up. Whenever I bring something into Twinmotion, I always like to expand my options when I import and choose how I'm going to bring that asset in. We can collapse this. I know that there's one material map that's assigned to it, so it's really not important when you're bringing in individual assets. When you are importing multiple assets in, it probably will make more sense to keep the hierarchy so it actually splits up the geometry when you bring it in to separate objects, rather than grouping everything that could potentially have the same material assigned to it into one Twinmotion object. So just kind of rule of thumb here, if you are bringing in any types of 3D assets that have either multiple materials or even a single material, if we don't want to group them all together into, let's say, one asset, then keeping the hierarchy will control that and make sure that they're still separated as geometry, not grouped together by their material. All right. So with that, doesn't look like much happened. Maybe out in the distance, you can see the asset did show up all the way out here. I have my scene graph open in Twinmotion. Some of the downloads they get labeled this really just generic label, funny label from Megascans. We can right click, rename that. And this is something I always like to do, especially as I'm creating assets with the custom library. Make sure you name it something that you understand. I don't like that weird naming convention. Really nice tip here. once it's imported in, I didn't know that it would come in that far away from where I was looking, but keyboard shortcut here is really nice. If you select on an object in your scene graph and just type the letter F as in Frank on your keyboard, it will zoom right in to that object. So we're looking at our parking meter. As you can tell, there is no material assigned to this. It's just generic right now. If I use my eyedropper, default material. So it didn't automatically embed that material. So one of the processes, if you were to do this old method of downloading something with separate material maps, before we save it to our custom library, we probably really want to assign the correct material to it before we save it. Otherwise, every time you load it into a project where you're going to use this parking meter, you're going to have to go through the process of reassigning the material to it, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a custom library. We want to make sure we're saving time and not creating more time in doing processes that we can repeat and simplify here. So what I'm going to do now is just with this object, I pick the material. I'm going to change the texture to the correct texture, which should be in the same folder that I extracted this 3D asset to, which is back here, custom library. So we have an example picture, but here is the unwrapped material. So if I were to zoom into this, it would just look like, a bunch of stickers, but pick the albedo, open that up, and give it a second. We should see that material assigned to the parking meter, and there we go. So, it wraps perfectly to the object when we download it from Quixel Megascans. I'll show that in Twinmotion 2021, I could have eliminated this whole process of downloading it from the web and bringing it in. But again, I just want to show this. If you're grabbing content from other libraries online or your own libraries and bringing them into Twinmotion, you kind of need to know the step-by-step process of building them before you add them to your custom library. With that, I mentioned earlier, if this did have any type of opacity mask, we could turn that on. This map channel doesn't have any, it's all solid object, so I don't need to worry about that. We can control the brightness on the object. This is something that I do like to do. Sometimes those images might come in darker than we want them to, so we can just increase the luminosity on the object. That's not like emanating a bunch of light or anything from it. You can control the grunge on the material and then sound. I guess this is more for presentation, but sorry, I digress. I'm getting too much into the materials here. Let me just back out one step. One thing I always also like to do is apply the normal map to this to give this parking meter a little bit of texture before I load it in. So sometimes our geometry, even though this is a highly detailed piece of content that I downloaded, it still might have some issues with the geometry. So what I like to do is assign the normal map that was downloaded, and that's going to supplement some of that surface texture, the bump to it. There we go. You see some of that came through. Just in general, all of the things that we download from Megascans are real world objects that a team of people has gone out and scanned and created, either using point clouds or photogrammetry. So some of the smaller objects are things that are more detailed. When you really zoom into them, you might see some issues on the surface, but for the most part, they are very, very high resolution assets from the Megascans library. If you haven't checked them out yet, I definitely recommend seeing what they have on the website, and I'll show you with the Quixel bridge here, we can make this a lot easier. Anyway, once I've got all of that set up, this is good to go. The asset here, it actually does get created because I imported this in. It kind of gets created under a subfolder. One thing just to make this a little bit cleaner, in my opinion, is unless we have multiple assets that make up kind of one group in Twinmotion that we want to save to our library, it's almost a better idea just to rename the sub asset. I'll call this thing parking meter. because there's only one 3D object underneath this folder. And I'm going to save this to my custom user library. So really, really simple here. All you have to do is right click over that asset in your scene graph. Go through the process of assigning the material and everything, and then just choose to add it to your user library. Depending on how large the file is and where you're saving it to, this could take maybe 30 seconds or so to save it. I'll explain how I have my library set up and why it might take a little bit longer. So with my team and the people that are presenting Twinmotion, we like to share our content on our cloud drive, so we use Dropbox. So what we've done is we've set up a specific folder on Dropbox that we've selectively synced to our computers. We're storing all of these different assets in that folder so that when people are updating it, we're all getting the updates that everyone else is making once it runs through that selective sync process. So not sure why this one's taking so long. I did close out OneDrive. Maybe I know I needed to repath something. Let's see. Just give it a second to catch up. I'll show you where you can change the pathing, and I think that's where my mistake is. I might have not set this one up doing a customer demo. Oh, there we go. Something happened there, it finished. So just ignore what I just said. I'll continue to go here. So once that's saved as a custom object to my user library, it just shows up here under user library. Once it's here, I could completely close this project out or open up a different, let's see, we open up this cabin project. So once it's stored to our user library, that's it. I didn't have to click a save button. I didn't really have to do anything. It saves it to a separate folder, as I mentioned before, on your computer, and then you can access and drag and drop this into any of your projects. So just to proof that out, I wanted to open up this particular project that has some phasing and things turned on. But now that this parking meter is an asset, all we have to do to place it into our other projects is drag and drop. And there it is. Now, I've noticed this with some of the Megascans objects. They might come in rotated in the wrong direction. And one of the things I've done to fix that in the past is if you've noticed that's happening with different assets that you download, before you save them, you can transform the rotation. Let's see, -90. All right, that's good. So we can transform the rotation and then store it back to the library or replace the old one, and it should come in vertically. I don't know why, it's kind of hit or miss. I think it's just based on how the initial asset was created and where the origin was. But as you can see, I brought this in. Once it's inside the project, we can do our normal stuff. Just held the shift key down to move it, to create copy. So it's really easy once you've got that asset placed to copy it around within your project. So we can do that same thing if we decided that we've spent some time to work on a specific material. Maybe I grab this wood material here, adjust it, change the color, build the material from scratch with different bump maps and albedo maps tied to it. Once you have your materials dialed in, you can do the same thing here. We can right click over the material, call it, let's just go orange wood. So in the active project, I just pretend I edited a bunch of the settings of that material. To save it to the user library, you just right click over the swatch. So you pick it with the eyedropper, shows up in the sample area, and then add it to your user library. And what that does is it builds that material in the same way the 3D assets are stored. It's going to build that material in your user library too. So to keep things organized, we can create these folders. If I have 3D content that I want to store, once it's created, we just drag and drop that into the appropriate folder. Same with materials, I can just drag and drop these, and I'm just basically managing where those are organized. Okay. And in here, just clicking the plus sign creates your new folders. So you can create subfolders within folders of all your different assets that you're storing across the board. Now, when you're building this stuff, I mentioned that it does connect back to a typical folder structure. One thing that is good to understand is that in your preferences in Twinmotion, under custom paths, we have two paths that we can store these libraries. This one here, the user library folder, is the main one that I'll be using. So I mentioned ours is on Dropbox. Well, apparently I failed to repath this back to my Dropbox after I downloaded the update, or actually 2021 in general. So to change that path, you can just go into this browser, pick the correct path. So where we were storing the custom user library before was here. And I think we, just started under asset libraries for our team. So this is a cloud folder that we've set up. And what Twinmotion will do is it will automatically start creating those folders within that location. So if you do set it to a spot, and it looks like this is still using my absolute path to my C drive, so I would have to change some stuff with my Dropbox to get this to work where it's not using my user path to get that to update. But if you're able to create a shared folder directly on your C drive, and everyone has that same absolute path to that folder location, then you can set up your custom libraries. And as people are updating assets and materials to them, the entire team will have access to those without having to do really any additional configuration, as long as you have that same path to your computer. And you can do this with Dropbox. You can do it with OneDrive. Some of the cloud connectors are a little bit more complicated than others, but from what I've seen, there's usually a workaround to get that to work with cloud drives. If you're using a network location to store your assets, then obviously this is much easier. You can just point it right to your M drive or whatever drive you guys are using to set your content up, or even within a project. You know, if you're working on a specific project, you can always go in here and change this folder path, so that if you're not trying to create a global corporate library that has the content for all of your projects, and you just want to set it up, these custom libraries project to project, all it takes is going in here and repathing your user library to match where that project is, as long as everyone has that access to that network drive. The other thing here is this cloud library folder. So I'll just go over this briefly. This is pretty simple. I mentioned that in Twinmotion 2021, we do now have access to this Quixel Megascans bridge that's integrated into Twinmotion. So that same process I went through of downloading the content from the Megascans library, importing it in, this makes it a lot quicker. If I click on the Quixel Megascans, we have surfaces, so just materials, and then 3D assets that we can search. So let me just go search parking just to show you that it does have all of the same stuff. So there's the parking meter. Here's one that's similar. If I want to bring this item into my current scene, you just click the little download symbol in the right corner of that thumbnail. It downloads it to your computer, and then basically makes this available as a custom item from the Megascans library. So I probably wouldn't have gone through that whole process with the other parking meter because it's part of Megascans, but I wanted to go through that example to show you that, you know, with other objects, if you're not getting them from Megascans, you can create your own custom libraries. And there we go, there's the other parking meter, it's here. This is automatically, when we download it from the thumbnail, it's getting stored to your cloud library folder. So whatever you have set up here is where it's dropping that content. So again, if you have a network drive where people are downloading this cloud content from the Megascans library, just put it on the network drive that all of the users have access to that are using Twinmotion, and they'll have access to that same set of assets without having to download them. If we come back to this, we're able to favorite certain elements from the Megascans library as well. And if I just back out here, a couple spots, whoops. If we click the little heart symbol next to Megascans, it's going to show you all of your favorites. So that's another way to quickly get to any assets that you're using frequently that you're downloading from the Megascans library. And I think that is basically all the content that I wanted to cover for building your custom libraries. Really not too much to it. I'm sure there's probably some questions that will lead to other discussion, but you know, one thing that's great about Twinmotion is that we can do this. Not all of these real-time visualization programs allow you the flexibility to bring your own custom libraries in. I mentioned before that you can import your Revit models in, your SketchUp models, models that you created or downloaded in 3ds Max into Twinmotion and start storing those custom libraries and getting access to them for the whole team. So let's get to the Q&A panel.
Okay, I'm back. So we don't have any questions yet. I know we have quite a few people that have joined us today. So while we're waiting, I've just gone to our website, and in the chat, I will post a link to the resources for anything Twinmotion. Bear with me. Clip that. Control C. Control V.
One thing I did forget to show, one thing that I just generally think is pretty cool. With these custom assets, so I'm just bringing in individual geometry one at a time right now, but something that the custom library allows you to do in the same way that you would store a material to an object. If I grab this parking meter, and I'm just using this one as an example here, let me change the time of the day so we can see this work better with lighting. All right, let's make this nighttime. One of the things that we can do in creating these custom libraries is, you know, we also have just our normal, why can't I get out of this here? Get out of my favorites. There we go. We have our normal lights that we can assign. Let's just pretend I'm putting the Omni light on this parking meter, like it has a light beacon on it or something, you know, some really bright thing. I can raise this up maybe a little bit. Oh, that looks kind of cool. So with that light, back out, I grab it here. Oh, let's see, come on, why is my symbol for lights showing? There we go. So this is the Omni light. I can place that right on the light meter or right on, you know, better example would be a light fixture. But see how in the scene graph, we have the parking meter listed and then the Omni light is directly under it. So there really isn't any hierarchy between these two. We can drag the Omni light so that it actually gets grouped with that parking meter asset. And if we collapse that down, when we go to move the parking meter around, that light is attached to it or linked to it. So one great thing that the custom library allows us to do is, if I want to store this, and I'll rename it here because I don't want it to override my other one, let's call it parking meter with light. If I right click over this, add it to the user library, not only is it going to store the geometry, but it also has that light connected to it. So then when we go to our user library in the future, sorry, still loading or downloading that to my cloud storage here. If you were doing this to a network drive, I think I mentioned before, it would be a lot faster, but I don't know.
And also showing it through GoToWebinar, there's a delay too.
Yeah, we found that a lot with these Twinmotion presentations.
Yeah.
There can be some potential graphics issues between showing on GoTo.
That's so cool, though.
Yeah. So I'll let that load up, but I think in general, everyone probably understands the concept of if we tie the light to the object and store it, and really any of the objects we can connect geometry to as well. So if you had a lot of the assets that come with Twinmotion out of the box, like the tables, they might have some plates and some different entourage set up on them. When you expand those objects in the scene graph, you'll see all of those additional assets are grouped under that object. So if you go to move around the main object, all of the other things move with it. But the same idea goes for if we're saving them to our user libraries, it automatically kind of creates that group in the hierarchy with it. So it's just a really nice feature that we have.
Okay, so I have 2 questions that came in.
Cool.
We have content in Revit, furniture, appliances, etc. How would we convert and import those objects into Twinmotion?
So you can export them from the family editor in Revit to an FBX file and then import them in, and then assign the materials like I showed before and save them to your user library. So if you did that method, opening it from the family browser and exporting it, you would have to do that for every individual family. What I would recommend is create a Revit project with all of the different furniture assets or different assets that you're going to use over and over again in Twinmotion. Put them into one Revit project, go to a 3D view in Revit, export that 3D view out as an FBX. Make sure that when you import it in, you keep the hierarchy and don't collapse by material. And then what you can do, once that's imported, you can go through those individual objects in the scene graph and kind of one by one store them to your user library. And it should, if you set your materials up in Revit correctly, it should automatically have the correct materials assigned to them. Or maybe you don't like the materials from Revit and you're going through a process of replacing the materials on all of them with Twinmotion materials. You could do that before you save them to the user library, but that's just a quicker way instead of having to export 500 times. If you have 500 families in a Revit project and import them in, it just saves a whole bunch of time with that export process.
Okay. Maybe you've answered this, but where should textures be saved for the custom asset?
For the custom asset, they actually get integrated into the asset when you save them to the library. So it's really up to you if you want to keep your maps and materials and stuff separate somewhere else, maybe to assign on different objects in the future. But once they're saved to the object, you won't see the material maps when you go to your actual Windows Explorer, wherever it's saving it. So I can't remember if this is on my OneDrive. I know it won't show the material maps because they get integrated into the assets. It really doesn't matter if you've got the material assigned and save that asset to the library. I would recommend maintaining all of your maps either inside the projects that you're creating. So create your own project structure that has a folder for all of the maps that you're assigning to your materials, just so that, you know, if I have a certain wall type and I might want to use it later on and assign it to a different object or a floor or something, I can go through, find that map and recreate it. So general file organization, just use standard best practices for mapping or for maps and materials.
And that'll take you there.
So arrange and organize a Twinmotion user library with multiple subjects, like TM's own hierarchy. Yeah, but it's. I understand what you're asking here. If we look back at the libraries here, how they have these different icons for like materials versus vegetation versus objects. The only option that you have is to just name the folders. So we're not going to. It's integrated into the program what images show here, but essentially all that really is on the main page here. These are all just little folders that are embedded into the Twinmotion application. So you could really just rename your folders to match, materials, objects, create the subfolders, metals, woods, however you need to. And I would recommend doing that. Keep it really organized, especially if you're sharing this amongst other users internally. We want to make sure that everyone is maintaining that same standard of where these objects are going, and not like mine, where you just have kind of a mixed bag of junk. But
I always learn so much from you. Every time I watch one of these, there's something new. And then we've got Ethan's question.
Yeah, Ethan asks, I exported a Revit model once into Twinmotion and the colors and textures came in very off. Would it be better to just create and apply colors and materials in Twinmotion? Probably the easy answer to that one is yes. I know that in Revit you can assign, so Revit really supports kind of the legacy Autodesk materials, which don't really come in that great. And it also now supports physical materials. It's still hit or miss with how they're going to translate into Twinmotion. Twinmotion does, when it processes FBX, it converts the materials into the shader language that Twinmotion recognizes or that the Unreal Engine recognizes. And sometimes the rules between those programs or that translation causes things to become a little bit off. For most of your kind of standard materials like paint colors and things like that, it comes through fine just because it's based on RGB values. But when we start to get into actual images and textures, I have noticed that a lot of times there's either like UV scaling issues, UVW scaling issues, or even potentially some gamma issues that happen. So if you're really going to take the time and create custom libraries, I would recommend using Twinmotion materials or building new materials in Twinmotion from scratch and assigning them to your assets. That way you know that you're going to get a consistent look every time. It might take a little bit longer on the front end to build all of that initially, but it will pay off, especially as Twinmotion updates and new releases come out. You still will have access to all of your materials that you created. So it's not like you have to go through this process of recreating them every time a new release of Twinmotion comes out.
Okay, great. That is all the questions that we have for now. So with that, as always, thank you so much, Vince. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Stay well and stay safe, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.